the world where Kafka lives, the monster kaiju is a constant threat to humanity. However, humanity has learned to live with the problem and has created a special unit to deal with the monsters. One day, a kaiju suddenly appears from the sea, attacks the port, and threatens to flood the city. The monster is a giant, 60 meters tall, and destroys the entire city as it walks through the buildings. The government immediately deploys the National Defense Force, which surrounds the kaiju from all sides, and after confirming that the evacuation is complete, missiles are fired at it. The whole thing is televised nationwide, and people watch it on the internet and wonder which unit will fight the kaiju this time. This time, it is the 3 RD Division Special Forces that will be deployed. Several soldiers with special weapons emerge from a helicopter and swoop down on a nearby building. The kaiju continue to destroy anything in their way, but this time, the 3rd Division opens up a suppression fire, distracting and wounding the kaiju, and some of them run directly at the kaiju, dodging the kaiju's deadly attacks with ease and opening fire. Taking advantage of this confusion, the team leader, who was holding a hand cannon, fired a blast at the kaiju, hitting it directly in the heart. The kaiju bubbles and explodes. The kaiju explodes in a bloody mess, and the team leader watches, covered in blood. Later, Kafka watches the devastation through binoculars while eating his lunch and thinks about how much work it would take to clean everything up. Meanwhile, the citizens cheer that the 3rd Division has killed the monster with 0 casualties and in a very short time. Kafka arrives at the location and watches the huge crowd cheering for the defense group, but no one pays any attention to him as he passes by toward the kaiju corpse. This is because Kafka is the cleanup crew that starts after the battle is over, and while he does all the dirty work, the people who cause such a mess are fated as heroes. He climbs on top of the carcass and begins to break the beast down into pieces to clean everything up, while a drone comes to retrieve some of the samples. He notices that one of his companions is trying to hoist the monster's intestines. He yells to the man to back off immediately, but it is too late. The intestines rupture and the man is injured. Kafka rushes to the man and gives him first aid. Kafka looks at the carcass left behind and wonders how in the world he is going to clean it all up in less than a week. He is told by his boss to take charge of another part of the kaiju, which turns out to be the gut, the most dangerous and dirty part of the job. No matter how much Kafka hates the kaiju, he is going to get his hands on the most dangerous and dirty part of the job, the heated chainsaw. Kafka does everything in his power to jump head first into the intestines and clean them out. That night, Kafka returns to his room, which is quite dirty for a man whose job is to clean. Kafka tries to get the smell of intestines out of his nose, but without success, he realizes that the commander of the 3rd Division named Mina on TV is an amazingly talented person who not only became a division commander at the age of 27, but also defeated nearly 100 kaiju. Kafka recalls his past. Mina and he had been childhood friends, and they had overlooked the death and destruction caused by the kaiju and had made a pact to eliminate the kaiju from the earth. He was jolted back to reality when he saw a reporter mention that her popularity made her a prime candidate for future commander of the Wehrmacht. He became so depressed that he turned off the TV, but remembered that cleaning was an important part of his job, and that his job allowed him to live in a decent apartment and eat what he wanted. The next morning, as Kafka was about to return to work, a colleague called him to introduce him to a new part-time student. Coincidentally, it was the same dream Kafka had had when he was younger, but he eventually gave up on that dream and is now a veteran of the cleaning industry. Kafka turns around, embarrassed, and begins to sort through his locker. When the Inquirer asks why he left him, Kafka replies that he is a veteran of the cleaning industry. Kafka replies that he did his best, but there is always someone above him, and insists that Inukai will understand this when he grows up. To his surprise, Inukai said straight out that he would not give up on his dream and left to change his clothes. When Kafka returns to the site later that day, his boss assigns him the day's work. Kafka puts Inukai in the group that cleans intestines and is momentarily pleased that he can teach Inukai how hard his job is. However, the supervisor tells Kafka that he is the best at cleaning intestines and that he will clean them too. Kafka cries at his misfortune, but immediately gets to work. The supervisor tells Inukai that although Kafka complains a lot, he is an excellent worker and would have made an excellent officer if he had passed the exam. At lunchtime that day, Inukai completely loses his appetite, much to Kafka's delight. But he, like Kafka, has no appetite. Kafka endures the urge to vomit. Kafka notices that Inukai has not eaten anything, so he throws a vitamin drink in Inukai's face and tells him to drink it. While Kafka does his final check, Inukai notices that the worst part is clean, and he comes up behind Kafka and thanks him for helping him throughout the day. He also tells Kafka that the age limit for the SDF exam has been relaxed to 33, which is none of his business, and thanks him for making sure Kafka takes the exam again. Inukai then tries to leave, but Kafka stops him, saying that he is a good boy, which annoys Inukai. If Kafka had not risked his life to push Ikai away, Ikai would have been killed. Keeper tries to stand up, but Kafka is unable to do so. The Inukai is left alone, and Kafka has no choice but to flee. Kafka is forced to flee, but Inukai refuses to leave him alone. Kafka tells him that if he dies here, he will never become a force, and convinces the boar to help him. Kafka takes the rod and runs away, distracting the monster with a smile. The monster chases after him at full speed, but Kafka enters a narrow doorway, and the monster is unable to pursue. Kafka goes straight ahead without looking back and jumps out the window, getting slashed in the face. At that moment, he suddenly remembers that Mina was saddened by the death of a cat she knew in the attack. But Kafka tries to cheer her up, and the two then make a promise to join the defense force together and eliminate all kaiju from the face of the earth. Kafka is brought back to reality and wonders where he went wrong, but the kaiju is still too strong to give in. Kafka's will to kill fills him. He speaks of his intention to attack, but makes no decision. He decides to do something that will make the kaiju die. He whips it beyond its limits and throws the lesser weapon into the hole, but the kaiju is told to stand in his face. He never imagines what the kaiju will do, and the kaiju is thrown into the air, his entire life flashing before his eyes. He falls to the ground. The kaiju crushes his legs with its hands, and Kafka has no choice but to accept his fate and die. Just as the monster was about to wipe Kafka off the planet, a boar appeared out of nowhere with an iron rod and struck the monster in the face, saving Kafka's life. Kafka yells at him to run away, but Inukai insists that he has already notified the defense team and that he cannot be an officer if he cannot even save a human life. While Kafka wonders why he is so weak and useless, the monster begins to attack the young man. Just as the monster is about to end the lives of Kafka and the boar, a white tiger appears out of nowhere and begins attacking the monster. Suddenly, Kafka hears Mina's voice. She orders her teammates to divide their roles, instructing them to secure the parameters and take care of the wounded while she searches the area for other kaiju. Kafka loses consciousness and wakes up in the hospital at night. There he thinks about how Mina has achieved her goal and reached a position where Kafka cannot even think about following her. As Kafka is feeling miserable, Inukai calls his name. The boar keeper thanks her for saving his life and tells her to run away. Kafka thinks about it before insisting that he really should become a member of the Defense Corps, a job for which he would really be suited, and with renewed inspiration, he decides to take the next exam for the Defense Corps. Before Kafka could scream at the monster in the compartment, it burrowed deep into Kafka's throat, drowning out Kafka's screams. When Inukai noticed something was wrong and realized that he had become a monster, Kafka shouts to the boar that he is Kafka, but the boar is too stunned to say anything. The defense team is immediately notified. Meanwhile, an alarm is sounded telling people to stay indoors and lock their doors because a small monster has been sighted. Back at the hospital, Inukai cannot believe what he is seeing and thinks that Kafka may have been eaten by the monster, but he soon finds out that the monster is Kafka. The old man panics when he sees never get married if he does this and will die a million deaths if anyone finds out. The boar man says they have other things to worry about and tries to drag Kafka away. Kafka stays where he is and asks Inukai if he thinks he can still join the defense team. Inukai immediately shakes his head and says he can't because he would be killed on the spot. Inukai finds an abandoned construction site and tells Kafka that he will be safe if he hides here, on the other side of the city. The boar tells Kafka that this is fortunate because the defenders will have to deal with the explosion first, giving them more time to hide and figure out what is going on. Another monster emerges from the ground, completely destroying the house and trapping the woman. The mother tells her to run away, but the child is adamant and tries to move the object that is house. At that moment, a monster appears behind them that completely shakes the monster. Kafka is shocked and blood rains down on him, and the remains of the monster fall to the ground. Kafka finally realizes that he is okay and feels guilt and the judgment of the Italian. Kafka still has a dream of becoming a member of the defense team and lining up with Mina as an equal. He turns toward his equal. He tells her that his dream of becoming a defense team member is still alive and that he will take the test. That night, Mina arrives with her team, but the monster has already been exterminated. She turns around to comfort the girl and tells her not to worry because she will destroy every single kaiju. The girl nodded, but said that the good kaiju that saved her and her her mother from the kaiju should be saved. This really surprised her, but she said nothing. Meanwhile, Kafka was back to normal and returned to the hospital with the boar. He lied to the other patients, saying that after the kaiju appeared in his room, he ended up hiding, but that he was perfectly safe. Kafka then learned how to better control his powers, but the media had yet to discover Kafka's monster. Inakai watches this news from the cleaning room and is given Inakai, who questions her about the test. Kafka is still concerned about her identity, however, and she insists that she is exam number 26. She approaches Kafka menacingly, sniffs him, and then asks why he smells like a monster. Kafka gets really scared and thinks of a way out of this predicament without revealing his identity and getting killed. The girl calls herself Kiko, seems to be quite rich, and talks down to the boar, saying that he should have given up his parking space. Reno tells Kikoru that he and Kafka work as kaiju cleaners, explaining his smell swaying her doubts. At that moment, Kafka approached the overturned van, picked it up like a toy, and put the van back together. Kiko is shocked by this and wonders if this man has a special suit like her. Kafka told her not to scratch the van, as it was company property, but before she could get to it, her butler arrived in a G-Wagon and took the parking space for himself. Kafka was offended by this, but he was left with no other option. Meanwhile, Kiko walked out with her butler and escort, showing how much of a ballbuster she was. Kafka was ranting about her when he noticed that Inakai looked super angry. He knew that Kafka had used his monstrous powers and reminded her that if anyone saw her, Kafka would be killed and Inakai would be imprisoned. Kafka tries to explain himself, claiming that he just got smarter and transformed his hand to pick up the van, but Akai is having none of it and tells Kafka that if he ever uses his powers again for no reason, he will send him back home. Kafka and Reno begin the physical part of the test, which Kafka barely passes, and move on to the aptitude test. The proctor for the exam, the vice captain of the 3rd Division, Sashiro Hashina, explains that the recruits need to eliminate a large group of Yoju in a massive training area. The recruits are outfitted with power suits made from kaiju muscle fibers that empower them, boosting their physical capabilities and their weapons and providing them with a shield that, if activated, makes them fail the test. The suits have a power output expressed as a percentage, with Kafka being the only recruit with a 0% output. Despite that, Kafka utilizes his knowledge of kaiju to support others in eliminating the targets when a Yoju attacks him and injures him. Right before his shield activates, Kafka is saved by Kikoru, after which Sashiro advises him to quit due to his injuries. Kafka refuses and chooses to continue as Mina watches his progress. Don't forget to write comments because you can be in the next video. Right, I want to be in the video and you will definitely get in. Thanks for watching.